Welcome to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 119 of the podcast. And in this edition of the podcast, I want to talk about the LA Clippers blowing a 3-1 series lead and losing to the Denver Nuggets in the second round of the Western Conference playoffs. This was supposed to be the big year for the Clippers, the year that we all predicted they were going to at least make it to the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers and take over LA and finally make a trip to the NBA Finals. Instead, they do Clippers things that we're used to them doing, blowing 3-1 series leads and never living up to the hype of the team that we all thought that they could be. Jamal Murray, who absolutely balled out this entire NBA postseason and is now in the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers, scored 40 points in that Game 7 against the Clippers, while the Clippers' two stars, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, scored a combined 24 points in Game 7. Now, I want to talk about this idea that's been floated about all week, that this is Kawhi Leonard's fault. That is completely and utterly ridiculous. Kawhi Leonard is a two-time Finals MVP, and there was a stretch this postseason where he had 9 straight games of 30 or more points. He absolutely balled out this postseason, and the only reason that the Clippers made it this far was because of Kawhi Leonard, when we all know all season long they never lived up to their hype. Yes, they finished second in the Western Conference, but they were never the juggernaut team that we expected them to be. There are two people who are primary responsible for the Clippers sitting on their couch right now, and those two people are Paul George and Doc Rivers. First off, Paul George was never the superstar this season we all thought they were going to be. The reason why the Clippers are sitting at home, because they became a one-man show. They became all about Kawhi Leonard. I remember the day hearing about that Paul George was going to the Clippers and being like, oh wow, there's a new powerhouse in the Western Conference. You're going to have two of the best two-way players on the same team. One of those guys lived up to that billing. That's Kawhi Leonard. He lived up to being a top 10 NBA star. Paul George did not live up to even being a top 20 NBA player all season long. He never lived up to his part of the bargain. I'm not even talking about that ridiculous nickname that he calls himself, Playoff P. I don't think he was the Paul George I expected in the regular season. There were stretches where he looked really good, but he was never that guy from Indiana or even that guy from Oklahoma City Thunder last year at all this postseason or at all during the regular season. Last year, there were times where we thought Paul George was a legitimate MVP candidate, and this season, he just did not bring it. Whether or not that's health or not, Paul George did not live up to that billing. So yes, Kawhi Leonard basically had to become a one-man show, and he didn't even have as many pieces as he had with the Toronto Raptors last year, where last year he could rely on guys like Kyle Lowry and Pascal Siakam. He doesn't have those type of players on the Clippers. There were basically 3 main scoring options for the Clippers this season: Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Lou Williams. Yes, you had Montrezl Harrell, who was the 6th man of the year, and he's a very good player. But those are the 3 guys who were the 3 legitimate top scorers on the team, and Kawhi Leonard was the only one who brought consistency to that organization as a player. Yes, Harrell balled out this season, but so many of those guys, and remember, we all thought they were going to be the best perimeter defense we'd ever seen. Game 7, who scored the most points for the Denver Nuggets? A point guard scored 40 points. It didn't matter that they had Pat Beverly. It didn't matter that they had Kawhi Leonard or Paul George. Jamal Murray absolutely balled out against them and scored 40 points. Their greatest strength turned out not to be the strength we all thought it was going to be. Remember, we all thought this was going to be like Pippen playing with Jordan, like they were going to win Defensive Player of the Years together, and they were going to be the best perimeter defense we'd ever seen. They didn't come anywhere close to that this season. I think this is a case where maybe Kawhi Leonard picked the wrong partner here. Yes, he wanted to pair up with another star, and he picked Paul George. I think he might have picked the wrong guy. I think maybe he should have picked Jimmy Butler, and the two of them should be in the Clippers right now, because Jimmy Butler single-handedly has brought the Miami Miami Heat to within 2 games of going to the NBA Finals. The Miami Heat are up 2-0 on the Boston Celtics. I know that pains me to say it, but that's the truth. Maybe that's the type of guy that Kawhi Leonard should be partnering up with, because I don't think Kawhi Leonard needs to partner up with a LeBron James. Kawhi Leonard can be Batman, but he needs a Robin, and Paul George was not a good enough Robin this season for the Clippers, and that's the difference between the Clippers and the Lakers. LeBron James has his Robin and Anthony Davis, and he played like a top 15 NBA player. At no point this season did Paul George look like a top 20 NBA player. At no point this season did that duo look like the dominant duo we thought that they were going to be. So maybe Kawhi Leonard got it wrong by who he formed a partnership with, but to criticize Kawhi Leonard for not showing up in a Game 7 where he brought it every single other game of this postseason, to say Kawhi Leonard is nowhere near LeBron James's level, I just think is ridiculous. First off, I don't think Kawhi Leonard is as good as LeBron James. I don't think he is that, but he is a really great player who I would put in my top 3. I would put Giannis, I would put LeBron, and I would put Kawhi Leonard in no particular order. I don't know who the unanimous number 1 player is. I do know this. I would put Kawhi Leonard ahead of a guy like Kevin Durant. Even though both of them have won championships, Kawhi Leonard has won championships as the sole star player on a basketball team. He's won championships without guys like Steph Curry, without Draymond Green, and without Klay Thompson. I know Kevin Durant is a great talent, but I would pick Kawhi Leonard ahead of him, and I would probably pick Kawhi Leonard ahead of Giannis Antetokounmpo. So I would go LeBron, Kawhi, then Giannis, then Durant. But Kawhi Leonard is no further than the second best player in the NBA, and any NBA team would want Kawhi Leonard as their best player. So to say that this Game 7 where he lost to the Nuggets is on the shoulders of Kawhi Leonard, I think is complete and utter nonsense. It's anyone but Kawhi Leonard's fault. He brought everything to the Clippers that I expected him to. He was an elite offensive and defensive player. It's Paul George who didn't deliver what we all thought he was going to the Clippers. And that brings me to the other person who deserves the majority of the blame when it comes to the Los Angeles Clippers not living up to the hype machine. That's Doc Rivers. I absolutely love Doc Rivers as a basketball coach. He led my Boston Celtics to a 2008 NBA championship, and that is my favorite basketball team of all time. But since joining the Clippers, he's been given elite NBA talent. Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, JJ Redick, now Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Lou Williams. He's been given Jamal Crawford so much great NBA talent and has not even gotten to a Western Conference Finals, and he's blown 2 3-1 series leads. That is not acceptable for a coach of his caliber. At some point, you have to look at Doc Rivers and say he's not doing a great job with the talent that he's been given. He's been given Hall of Fame talent. Chris Paul is one of the best point guards of all time. Kawhi Leonard is one of the best small forwards of all time. Paul George is a great two-way player who had one of his worst seasons under Doc Rivers as a head coach. When the team doesn't have chemistry, that goes on the head coach. And the LA Clippers at the end of that Game 7 did not look like they had great chemistry. It's interesting to note that the guy who was once given the job to make one of the best trios of all time, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen, has had trouble forming other duos with other NBA stars. Doc Rivers failed to turn Chris Paul and Blake Griffin into a legitimate NBA title contending duo, and it feels like he's failing to do the same thing with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. You can't say that the Clippers have given Doc Rivers lack of talent. I've listed all those players. Those are all elite Hall of Fame level guys. It's up to Doc Rivers for them to live up to the hype and to become a championship basketball team. It's more on Doc Rivers than it is on Kawhi Leonard. I understand wanting to keep Doc Rivers as your head coach because he would get another job in a heartbeat. He is a great head coach, but he's blown 3-1 series leads in his career. That's the most. The Clippers blew 2 double-digit leads in this series to the Denver Nuggets. We all expected there to be an all-LA Western Conference Finals, and now we're not getting that. We're getting an LA Lakers Denver Nuggets Western Conference Finals, and for the LA Clippers not to be in that discussion is inexcusable. When you have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, you have to at the very least least get to the Western Conference Finals. I mean, think about that. Doc Rivers has had so much talent with the LA Clippers. I can't fault the guy for not winning an NBA championship, but I can say with the talent he's been given, he hasn't lived up to the hype as their head coach. He was supposed to get them to be over the top great, and they haven't been that. They've had Chris Paul, they've had Blake Griffin. Yeah, those guys had injuries, but they never came close to being NBA champions. They can't even get out of the second round. At some point, you have to think to yourself, maybe we need to move on from Doc Rivers and get another person to be our head coach. I mean, clearly Kawhi Leonard wants Doc Rivers to be his head coach at this point, and that's why Doc's going to remain there. But this needs to turn around next season. They need to fix this. They need to make Kawhi Leonard and Paul George a legitimate star duo. I think you can look at this and say that the LA Clippers might not have even beaten the Dallas Mavericks in the first round of the playoffs if the Mavericks were fully healthy with Luka Doncic and a fully healthy Kristaps Porzingis. They might not have even gotten out of the first round. At no point this season did the LA Clippers look like an elite basketball team. Kawhi Leonard looked like a NBA superstar. My issue with the Clippers is that they became a one-man show when it was supposed to be a star duo. The reason why the Lakers did end up living up to the hype is because LeBron James was insane. He was an MVP candidate, but the difference between the Lakers and the Clippers is that LeBron James had Anthony Davis. He had Anthony Davis be a top 10 NBA star this season, a legitimate star to go alongside LeBron James. The Clippers did not have that in Paul George, and that's what the Clippers needed. They needed Paul George to be a legitimate NBA superstar this year, like he's been in the past. He did not form a great duo with Kawhi Leonard. It looked like he had better chemistry with Russell Westbrook and OKC. And if Paul George never lives up to the hype of becoming a great player with the Clippers and forming a formidable duo with Kawhi Leonard, we could be looking back at that trade and saying that the LA Clippers never should have traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who, by the way, had an amazing season along with former Clipper Chris Paul. Those two formed a great NBA duo. I mean, they almost beat the Rockets. I mean, that's a guy who's going to be one of the better players in the NBA. And maybe moving forward, I would want Shai Gilgeous-Alexander over Paul George. I think that's seriously something you have to consider, is that the Clippers picked the wrong guy, and now they're probably stuck with them, because I think after next season, both of those players can opt out of their contracts. And how is this going to get any better? We cannot talk about the Clippers being legitimate title contenders ever again until they at least make the Western Conference Finals. I don't want to talk about the Clippers being the prohibitive favorites, even if they win 64 games next season. Don't talk about it until they at least make it to the Western Conference Finals, because so far during the Doc Rivers coaching tenure of the Clippers, they have not made it to that point, even though he's been given Hall of Fame talent. Chris Paul, Blake Griffin was an elite talent at some point. He wasn't the Blake Griffin that we know with the Pistons now. They had Jamal Crawford. This is playing out in that similar fashion where he has Kawhi Leonard and he has Paul George, but yet they don't feel like a great NBA duo. I think next year is going to be Doc Rivers' last chance. Yes, it was announced that Doc Rivers will probably be coming back to the Clippers, but he needs to make it work. They need to at least get to the conference finals next year for Doc Rivers to keep his job as the head coach of the LA Clippers. It's that simple. I don't care that I think Doc Rivers is a great head coach. He was great for the Boston Celtics in 2008. Then he went to the NBA Finals in 2010. He hasn't gone back to the Western Conference Finals or even the Eastern Conference Finals since then. It's time for him to show that he's a great head coach once again. And I do think there's a chance he could bounce back next season and get them there. But this is his absolute last chance to make it work with the LA Clippers, because if we look back at his tenure with the Clippers, and he has Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, Jamal Crawford, JJ Redick, DeAndre Jordan, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Lou Williams, and never gets to the Western Conference Finals, that will be an utter failure for Doc with the Clippers. And I think this guy is a Hall of Fame coach. Yes, I'm going to come out and say it. I think Doc Rivers is going to make the Basketball Hall of Fame. He's one of the best head coaches in Celtics history. The Celtics were going in the wrong direction. Then he was given 3 star players, and they won a championship, and they went to another NBA Finals. I think he deserves to make it to the Hall of Fame, but his tenure with the Clippers has not been the same magic, and he's been given the same amount of talent then, maybe even more to this point. Again, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George. Think about this. The Toronto Raptors lost in the second round of the NBA playoffs without Kawhi Leonard. Then Kawhi Leonard with the Clippers lost in the second round of the NBA playoffs. So Kawhi Leonard left a team, and the team that he left was eliminated in the same round as his new team. That's unacceptable. Next season in the NBA is going to be a fascinating season for NBA star duos. We are going to figure out which one of these work and which one of these can't coexist. I think next year is a big year for duos like James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. We're finally going to see them play some basketball games together, so we're going to see what they have in store for us. And we're going to figure out if Paul George and Kawhi Leonard can coexist, or the Clippers should break them up and try to find Kawhi Leonard a different star to form a duo with. Because again, this season it didn't work out. Next year, we're going to find out whether or not they should continue to play basketball together on the same team. Should they both coexist with the Clippers, or should the Clippers move on from Paul George and try to find Kawhi Leonard another star? Because I think there's life for Kawhi Leonard with the Clippers without Paul George and without Doc Rivers. I think he will remain a Clipper for the rest of his career due to the fact that I think this guy wants to be in LA. I don't think he wants to play for the Lakers, but I do think he wants to be in LA. I think Kawhi Leonard is going to be a Clipper for the long haul. I think the two people that deserve the most blame for this loss to the Nuggets, and the two people that will probably be removed from the Clippers if they don't fix it next season, are Paul George and Doc Rivers. But I think Kawhi Leonard is going to remain a Clipper. I don't think he's going to jump ship and form a star duo with somebody else in another team. I think he wants to form a star duo with the Clippers, and I think he deserves to form another star duo with the Clippers, because this loss to the Denver Nuggets is not on Kawhi Leonard. I think we love to make fun of this guy because he's quiet. I think some people are annoyed by the fact that we anointed him as the best player in the NBA last season. I get it, but he lived up to the hype. He had 9 straight games in this NBA playoffs with 30 plus points. It's Paul George who did not bring the goods, and it's Doc Rivers who didn't make this team have chemistry. Those are the two people that deserve the most blame. Because to look at LeBron James right now and to say he's a better basketball player than Kawhi Leonard right now, I think is ludicrous. I think LeBron James is going further because he has a better star who he formed an acceptable duo with in Anthony Davis. If Kawhi Leonard had Anthony Davis, guess where the Clippers would be? The Western Conference Finals. If LeBron James was given Paul George, guess where the Lakers would be? At home probably, because Paul George wouldn't perform then. Next season is going to come down to, can Paul George and Doc Rivers get their acts together? And if the answer is yes, the Clippers will live up to the hype. If the answer is no, then this band will be broken up, but I think Kawhi Leonard will be left standing, and I think he will be remaining a member of the LA Clippers for the foreseeable future, and he should remain so, because again, I think this guy is a top 2 player in the NBA. He's one of the best two-way players in the NBA, and this guy is a legitimate playoff performer. 2-time Finals MVP with the Spurs and the Raptors. He got the Raptors to win an NBA championship, a team that had no right to go back to that spot, a team that couldn't get it done with DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. I remember watching this postseason and people saying, wow, Kyle Lowry has turned into such a clutch NBA performer. I think a lot of that credit gets to go to Kawhi Leonard, because where was Kyle Lowry's playoff stats before Kawhi Leonard got to the Raptors? This idea that Kawhi Leonard is now going down a step because the Clippers lost a Game 7 to the Nuggets. Yes, he didn't show up in that Game 7. That's not all right. But he is still one of the best players in the NBA, and to call him out on this loss when it's clearly the fault of Doc Rivers and Paul George is completely and utterly ridiculous. I do think the Clippers should move on from some guys on their team. Like, I don't think Zubac should be their starting center. I think they should probably move on from Patrick Beverley because I don't think they need a defensive first point guard. I think they need an actual point guard because I don't think Paul George is a great passer. I think Kawhi Leonard is an okay passer. I think they need to get an elite passing point guard because what's the point of having Pat Beverley as a great defensive point guard if Jamal Murray is going to score 40 on you in Game 7 anyway? I think maybe they should move on from Lou Williams. I don't know how much he has left in the tank. They need to keep Montrezl Harrell, they need to keep Paul George, and they need to keep Kawhi Leonard. I think everyone else on that team should be examined, and maybe they should move on from them and get better pieces and form a team that has chemistry, because at no point in this season did the Clippers look as good as we all thought they were going to be. My point is, next season, we all know that Kawhi Leonard is going to step up when the Clippers need him most. Now, they need Paul George and Doc Rivers to step up their game, or the exact same thing will happen next season, and the Clippers won't make the Western Conference Finals. Those two need to step up. Doc Rivers and Paul George, not Kawhi Leonard. He's an elite two-way player who has performed great in the playoffs. Paul George is the one who needs to step up, and Doc Rivers once again needs to prove he's one of the best head coaches in the NBA. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm Cam McKinney. There'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and iTunes, so please rate, review, and subscribe.